to a new episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm Sarah Westvick.
I'm Sarah Brown.
And I'm Luke Shelton.
Each episode, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
All of this is made possible by our supporters on Patreon, so we want to thank them and encourage you to check out the community at patreon.com/Tolkien Experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you, so without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. So, hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I am so thrilled to introduce this episode's guest to you. Joel Merriner is an associate lecturer in art history at the University of Plymouth, currently concluding his PhD in art history, exploring East and Central European Tolkien illustrations. In fact, you may have heard him talk about just that at the 2021 Tolkien and Diversity Seminar. In July 2021, his article on the same topic was published in Foreign Policy. Joel has also started a video series on the hidden recesses of Tolkien illustration called Arda Illuminated, with part 2 coming up in August. You can probably already guess that there is so much for us to talk about, so I'd just like to welcome you to the podcast, Joel. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. Really happy to be here.
Let us jump right into it. Tell us, how were you first introduced to Tolkien's work?
Well, I was quite young, and it sort of happened in stages. I was thinking about this the other day, and initially I thought I was 8, but the more I thought about it, I think I was probably 9 or 10. And I was in my junior school in a little town in Cornwall called Porthleven. And we had it's like a Christmas fair at the school. So you had people kind of turning up and selling their cakes and decorations. And we had a jumble sale where people would bring stuff and lay it out on the tables, etc. And so this was, for me and my friends, this was a chance to kind of run around the school unattended for a few hours in the evening with a bit of pocket money. So we turned up. And I remember we were supposed to have Christmas hats. So we were all supposed to have been making these Christmas hats, which were like Christmas cakes and Christmas puddings or sort of Christmas trees. And for some reason, I decided I was going to try and make the Sutton Hoo helmet. So I had this hat with this tinsel down the back, supposed to look like chainmail. And so we were in the jumble sale, and there was a bookstall, and I had a little bit of money, and so I was looking for a new book. I just read Watership Down, which is one of my favourites then and still is, and also Treasure Island. So I was looking for something kind of exciting, a bit of fantasy. And I found this copy of the Hobbit. I don't know if you know this one from 1966. It was a paperback, and it had Tolkien's own sort of pencil drawing of Smaug on the front. It said The Death of Smaug. So I saw this, I saw it then. It had a label on it was 10 pence, it had a label on Smaug's head. And which I found annoying because I thought, why stick the label on the dragon's head for a start? But I was looking at it and I thought this is actually a real drawing on the front of this, because it's a very soft pencil drawing. And I looked at it, I've got to buy this. I've never seen a book with a drawing, actual proper drawing on the front. I didn't realise it was actually a reproduction until I got it home. So I bought that and I took it home and I read it really quickly. And obviously, it's probably over 2 or 3 days. And ironically, the next kind of month or so, our teacher started to read it as the sort of the school story. So he would read a little bit every day, and at the end of the day, and I'd be like, "Oh, I know this bit. I've already read this." Blah blah blah. And the teacher said, "Well, if he has wrote other books, so why don't you go and have a look in the library?" So I went off to the library, and this is the public library in town rather than the school library. And the librarian there, she said, "Well, we haven't got anything in at the moment apart from the biography by Humphrey, the famous biography." And so I got that. Bear in mind, I was age 10. I started reading the first few pages about Bloemfontein and all these kind of places, and I couldn't get my head around it. Far too dusty. So I went back again, and I managed to find The Return of the King. There was no Two Towers. Somebody had already got that out, and somebody got out The Fellowship. So I got those out, and I took them home. And I took the Return of the King home, and I thought, okay, I don't know any of these characters, what's going on. So I read the synopsis to begin with. Thought that'll be all right. That'll get me into the story. And so I started reading. I read the whole of that one, and just relying on the synopsis to tell me what had happened before. So that was that was an interesting one. And then a friend of the family turned out she had the full trilogy, so she lent me volumes 1 and 2, so I could actually kind of catch up on the plot. So, and it was weird because it seemed a lot. Obviously, the style, the writing style, evolves as it goes through the trilogy. So when I started the Fellowship, I thought, well, this is weird compared to the sort of the grand epic sort of feel of book 5, particularly book 5. And so it took me a little while to get into it, but then I started to find I actually preferred the Fellowship to any of the others. And so I read that, and then I read it again because this shows how old I am at this time. This is when the BBC series first came onto the radio, the BBC dramatisation. And so I kind of read it again in tandem with that. So each week you'd have an hour on a Sunday, and I would listen to that, and then I would read, kind of try to sort of read in time with the serial. So that cemented the voices of a lot of the characters in my mind. Michael Hordern as Gandalf. Various Peter Woodthorpe as Gollum. I always think of his voice when I think of Gollum. Fantastic though Andy Serkis is, that's always the voice that I sort of go to as a default. So that's how I got into it. First of all, text, through sort of the text and the story, but I had another thing visually, as you should know from the kind of work that I do. I'm always thinking of pictures, and again, not much long, about a year after I first read The Lord of the Rings, we had a school trip to the Minack Theatre to see The Hobbit, dramatisation of The Hobbit. And I don't know if you know the Minack Theatre. It's like an open-air theatre down near Land's End. It's been carved out of the rock by this woman. It took her about 50 or 60 years, a neoclassical theatre. So it's a really nice spot to see a Tolkien play. And the first, you have to walk down to the headland so you see the sea and everything. And as we all walked down there, sort of in this line off the school minibus, the theatre group had built an animatronic Smaug. So I had this head, which is about 8 foot long, coming out of the side of the cliff. And I just thought, wow, look at that. And it had smoke coming out of the nostrils and everything. So I just thought, well, this is something, this is what happens when creative people get hold of this stuff. This is what they can do. And that's the first time I'd seen something like that. And I thought, I'd like to get in. I'd like to get into that. So, and there was just one more thing to cut this long story short. The next little piece of the jigsaw was when I was given for Christmas a Tolkien bestiary by David Day. And David Day, a bit dodgy when it comes to his text and his what he didn't know about Tolkien, he would kind of elaborate and embellish and sort of make up. So I wouldn't recommend his text, but it was the pictures. The pictures, seeing is such a collection of eclectic, diverse work. It was like a sort of bomb going off in my head when I saw this. So many fantastic images. And I was particularly taken by a couple of guys, Victor Ambros and Ian Miller. And their work is, I still tweet stuff, examples of their work today. And so, that just absolutely blew my mind, because I'd seen little bits of art before from Joan Wyatt and some of the American stuff, the Hildebrands, but I was never really into that style. But when I saw this book, it was, that was the kind of the visual piece of the jigsaw came in, and that really sort of sparked everything off. That, it was fantastic. I started drawing, I started copying Victor Ambros's work day in, day out, and that really just, to cut that long story short, that really was the thing the big thing which started me off.
I have to say, I don't think I've ever met anybody who went from The Hobbit to the Humphrey Carpenter biography. So that was.
I have read that since, and I read it since and enjoyed. Yeah, it was not the best choice for the age I was.
No, not for when you're just starting out. I was going to say that I do love to see that thread that's gone through your entire experience with Tolkien about art, starting from that sketch of Smaug all the way to the David Day books, which I agree, like, the text is a bit dodgy, but the visual components of them are just amazing. I think like one of the second Tolkien books that I saw after I first read The Hobbit was his companion to The Hobbit, and just like the way that the book was bound and the illustrations, it was just so visually rich. It was wonderful. So yeah, I really resonate with why that call to you, and how, as you said, how
Yeah.
creative people can get with like actually visualizing these texts. It's really interesting.
Yeah, so the front cover of the bestiary, which was an Ian Miller, I think it's an image of Glaurung or something like that. It's just so incredible. It was like a biomorphic dragon, part machine, part animal. It's incredible.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. It really harkens back to those, like, I can't remember if it was Book of Lost Tales or something, that the idea of, like, dragons being sort of metallic, or created out of metal was sort of floated around. But it's very cool the way it evokes that.
No, I was just going to say that there was another artist from that period, Roger Garland, who had a similar kind of approach to the way he created did dragons, and particularly there's an image of the Fall of Gondolin where they're like machines, almost like robots.
Wow,
which kind of
very
resonates
cool.
with Tolkien's description.
Let's go on to the second question then. So, what is your favorite part of Tolkien's work?
I would say, firstly, it's the evocation of landscape, the way he kind of conjures landscape from very small, from sort of hedgerows of the Shire to the kind of grand sort of panoramas, and it's almost like you're navigating this landscape in your mind visually as you're kind of traveling through the story. And I think my favorite best example of that for me is Freya's Company. I just love that chapter. It's probably my favorite chapter in all of his work. It's just that kind of the hobbits tramping through the Shire, so you have that sort of bucolic kind of landscape, which in a way reminds me of where I live here in Cornwall, but impinged with this sort of and it's impinged with this kind of tinge of menace, isn't it? Because you've got obviously the Black Riders, kind of in the spectre of them in the background, and then you get Sam with his anecdote about the gaffer, who's sort of had a conversation with one of the Black Riders, and then of course, obviously, as they go on, they meet the one on the lane, and so it's that kind of mixture of this sort of beautiful landscape, but then just this tinge of darkness, and it's very very slow, but that's kind of, it really appeals to me, that.
Yeah. I feel that. I was also really struck by his description of the Black Riders in that chapter. I remember getting chills up my spine when he described how it sort of, crawled off the horse and made the sniffing noise. Like, oh, that used to freak me out when I first read it when I was little.
Yeah, I love that because I thought Ralph Bakshi in his animation, he did that scene perfectly. I don't think Jackson was able to better the way that was done, that kind of creeping, the sniffing. And I also like just when they see that they have perhaps a glimpse, or they just hear the cry of the Black Rider. There's just something about that
Yes.
which really, really kind of resonated with me at the time. Yeah, primarily the landscape, but. So and there's another time which it's in The Hobbit, actually, where I think it's a warm welcome. Bilbo he's sort of bobbing down the river on the barrels, and he sees the Lonely Mountain, and then he listens to the raft men who are talking about how things are going sort of bad in Wilderland and around Mirkwood and around the Long Lake, etc. And it's just so what really appeals to me is the fact that you get this, you hear these about these places and these names, and Tolkien doesn't go into a great deal of detail, but you know that if you could sort of pick one of those names, that there would be sort of hidden layers of depth beneath it. So there'd be etymological depth, but there'd also be like some kind of pseudo-historical depth. You just know that it's out there, even if you never visit them in the story. It's just a sensation that these places have got these kind of hidden stories behind them. Sort of almost if you had a Hitchhiker's Guide to Middle Earth, you could kind of travel around, see the Carrock told Brandy to press a button, and you would just get a load of information come up about various kind of things to do with that. And so that really, I love that. And also the fact that when you reread these books over time, that kind of Tolkienian depth gets mixed up with your personal depth as well. So you remember when you first heard the word Mirkwood, what you were doing. With me, I remember when I did a drawing or whatever, and so they kind of gets intertwined. So you have personal depth, and you also get the depth of the Tolkienian depth, if you see what I mean.
I absolutely do, because your own sort of experience of the text is therefore like suffused into what the text ends up meaning. Which is just brilliant. You said that you began to draw as well. I'm really curious. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my drawing began really with the Victor Ambros images in a Tolkien bestiary. So I would literally spend hour upon hour copying, particularly his elves. So he was he was such a wonderful illustrator. He was a historical illustrator, so he brought a lot of tangible reality to the sort of the material culture of the elves, and the armor and the clothing they wore, even down to the little baskets that they had to pick their mushrooms. So you could imagine that there was somewhere in Mirkwood there would be some kind of basket weaving, willow weaving culture amongst the elves. So it was almost like he kind of brought this sense of reality to the imagery. So I used to try to copy that. And then when I also used to read the appendices, particularly when I only had access to the Return of the King, and that I honed in on the genealogies of the dwarves, and I loved reading their names, and I started to make comic strips based on the
Oh, wow.
The various dwarves, and particularly Durin, the original Durin. I did probably 100-page comic strip about the return of Durin, he arrives in the Third Age. It's slightly ridiculous when I think about it now.
No, it's super cool.
But he basically went around on a sort of trip around Middle Earth.
I love that.
He went to Minas Morgul. He sort of so silly. He dragged the Lord of Nazgul out and sort of pounded him, and then it culminated in the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, where he faced down the Balrog. The Balrog was victorious and threw him in the pool outside, where you can see the crown. But the way I thought this final battle happened just before the Fellowship arrived in Moria, and so Durin had weakened the Balrog, so Gandalf was able to finish him off a bit easier. So that's how I had this story culminate. But there you go. Yeah,
it's the untold history of Middle Earth. That's the only way that Gandalf won.
Sorry, Gandalf. Yeah, sorry, Tolkien. But so if I looked at it now, it probably would look pretty terrible. But I enjoyed it at the time. So yeah, that I spent a lot of my early teenage years doing that kind of thing.
That's super cool. That's so creative and fun. I love that. So, like, the next question is, what is your fondest experience of Tolkien's work? Is it related to art, do you feel, or is it something else?
Well, yeah, firstly, it would be that, as I was just saying, the sort of creative drive that it gave me to start sort of spinning off these characters and these stories and making these kind of drawings, cartoon strips, and eventually I kind of escalated into oil painting, doing oil paintings on canvas. So yeah, originally it was definitely kind of, that would have been really my fondest experience, because that's what I spent the most time doing, and that kind of led me really to going to art college originally back in the early 1990s. So, which I then promptly wasted my time in art college in a kind of blur of music and partying.
Don't we all?
Yeah, that's what drove me first of all to go to sort of think that I could have a career out of it. So yeah, that was my happiest experience to begin with. But that has more recently, apart from my academic sort of work, probably my fondest experience recently has been revisiting all the stories with my daughter and kind of reading them again and seeing her kind of sort of tread the paths which are so many people that have have already it's already gone. But yeah, it's that's probably been watching her. We started with The Hobbit, like bedtime reading, and then Farmer Giles of Ham, and then Lord of the Rings, and then it's kind of like she'd done her apprenticeship, and then she went off with a Silmarillion to school and read it herself at school. So she took that and in English lessons, and whenever she had a chance, she sort of read it at school. So yeah, revisiting that with my daughter has been probably my fondest sort of recent experience. So,
That's so wonderful. I'm so glad you get to share that with her.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's I mean, so obviously it's something which generations of people have done, and hopefully will continue to do. I didn't force her to read it. Say you must read Tolkien now you're of an age, but she just sort of by osmosis she saw the books and said, "Oh, can we read that?"
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, the next question is whether the way that you approach Tolkien's work has changed over time. And I know, as you've been saying, there's the academic side of it as well for you. So yeah, I'm curious to know about that as well. How has the approach changed as time has gone on?
Well, obviously, originally, as I've been sort of rambling on, I first kind of it was originally about what I could do myself creatively, what I could draw, I could paint, what this inspired me to do, or stories that I might write. Or when I started doing role playing games, which is another thing I loved as a teenager, we did the Middle Earth role playing game. So we'd be creating our own stories, our own characters and games, etc. So originally it was that it sounds very selfish actually. What can I do? What can I create? Which is because I'd seen these artists and going back to the people in the Minute Theatre and thought, can I do some of that? But then I came back to academia quite late in my sort of 40s and found sort of priorities had changed a little bit, and I wanted to look at other people's responses to the Legendarium. How other people, both artists, obviously, but other people, how they received the work, how they translated it into their own kind of visual worlds, but also how viewers of illustrations respond to those images, and how text and image work together. And so this is what I focus more on now, how the text and image work together on the page, in the books, but also in the eye and in the mind of the viewer to sort of create meanings, and how different people have different visual literacy, and it's how each person can kind of perceive something different to the person who's gone before. So it's kind of this is where I'm at now, and what really fascinates me is how these things work in the mind of the viewer to create meaning, which is what I've built most of my research is built on that. I'm obsessed with as people know probably from some of the things I tweet. I kind of I like to deconstruct images and take them apart, see how they work. If that's, I like to put them back together again. So I don't like to deconstruct them and then smash them to pieces. Like some people think that deconstruction means destruction. I don't like to do that. But I like to take things apart. I like to look at motifs and little things and think, where do they come from? How does that work? How do people perceive that? What does that make people think? And then I like to do that, and then I like to put it all back together again, so the next person can come and have a look and have their own view. So so this is what I'm at now. Rather than what I can create, it's what other people create and how viewers respond to that.
That's great. That's a really interesting and I think very important and pertinent approach to Tolkien. And I'm curious because a lot of I think the recent work that you've done and about your PhD as well was focused on Central and Eastern European interpretations, particularly Soviet interpretations, visual interpretations of Tolkien. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so I suppose originally because I was lucky to grow up pre Peter Jackson's movies. Fantastic that they are, and I love some of the visuals and the imagery. I say fantastic. I mean the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm not so keen on the Hobbit, but the visuals are wonderful at times. But I think since there's been a period, it's kind of changing a little bit now, but there was a period where imagery started to be very homogenized, and so. You think of Aragorn, you think of Viggo Mortensen, you think of Uruks, you think of Lurtz, and you think of Middle Earth, you think of Middle Earth. You think of New Zealand, beautiful though New Zealand is. But so there's a little bit of I find this sort of imagery becomes a bit monotheistic. So there's only one right image, and so having grown up before that. I was lucky that I still have my kind of imagery intact in my brain of what I saw beforehand. And I just thought, well, it'd be interesting to go back again to find, because the things that I grew up with, the Western, you could call it the Western kind of tradition of Tolkien illustration, sort of fed into the Jackson movies, obviously Alan Lee, John Howe, they came out of that tradition. I just thought it'd be interesting to go back before those movies, but look at a different tradition, somebody who had maybe a completely different take visually on what was going on Tolkien's work through various reasons, through context. Obviously, they're living behind the Iron Curtain. So I thought, well, the East Central Europe during the Soviet period would be an interesting place to look because they loved Tolkien and They managed to get hold of certain books, certain editions, certain images, but they couldn't have full access like we had. So they had to make do with what they could find and create imagery based on the material that they had, and also they had the problem of the censor, so they had to avoid the censor. So certain things they couldn't depict. And so I thought it would be interesting to see, what was going on in that scene. And also that initially led me to Sergey Yukomov's work, who was like the window into that. And I find his work absolutely incredible, fascinating. And I thought there was something about his work as well, which reminded me of what I was saying earlier, how Tolkien had these, with his landscapes, etc., there was these hidden depths beneath kind of what you saw on the surface. And when I was looking at Yukomov's imagery, I could see all these various things he'd taken from medieval texts and from Victorian illustrations and from sort of gospel books. And I could see all these things. I was just thinking, well, this is similar. There's this kind of mosaic thing going on, and there's these depths beneath these images which are worth looking at. And so I thought, that reminds me of Tolkien's way of writing, his way of creating, of sub-creating. So yeah, he was the window in, Yukomov, and then I've kind of expanded out to see what was happening elsewhere. So that's the PhD is really kind of focused on a period from 1982, which is when 1981, which is when the first Hungarian edition of the Lord of the Rings was published, and then it goes from 81 to around about 92, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So it's that period where there was a hell of a lot of stuff happening, and some really interesting stuff. So that's the focus of that now, of my research now. And I'm looking, as I was saying, with the in the seminar, the Tolkien Society Seminar, I'm looking at visual alterity in these works, because non-normative forms for Tolkien illustration.
That's really brilliant. I'm so glad that you're going into this area of exploring the visual element. I love that comparison that you drew about the sub-creative aspect between the visual and the text. Because it's sort of like two languages saying similar things, but obviously refracted through different lenses, because one is Tolkien and one is Sergey and his interpretation. So that is very cool. And I hope we can read your PhD when it's finished, because that would be amazing.
Oh, I hope so. I do have. I have a monograph idea, so I'm hoping that. I'm hoping. So I'm looking at these three aspects. So I picked up on one. I think I listed all three in the seminar paper: motif borrowing, original creation, and this thing dislocation, which I think are all forms of alterity. So. Yeah, this is what I'm homing in on, these three, because actually I expected everything to be totally different about this work, but of course there are similarities, because the artist could access works. There were some things they could find in the markets, or black market stuff, or somebody knew a friend who had an edition of a book. So the more I look, the more I find there is borrowing from the Western. Mainly they would borrow from Tolkien's own works. And they would also borrow from Pauline Baynes quite a lot as well, because of the early stuff. So that comes into my first kind of alterity. But yeah, it's interesting that. And I thought, well, how are they using this stuff? And they actually use it, like the things they borrow from Tolkien and Baynes, they use quite in a different way than you would expect. So again, it kind of ticks the box of alterity. So that became my first form, this motif borrowing. And then obviously there was the original creation, which I talked about in the paper, with Czerniawski, who had to dodge the censor, so he would use these very strange motifs of disembodied heads and beaks and eyeballs and these kind of things. So and Yukov with his tiled settings, which he puts the orcs and the Balrog in, these strange kind of things that look like public toilets, or that like sort of laboratories or hospitals. So yeah, there was that there was the original creation, and then there's this other form, which this other form of alterity, which are called dislocation, which is a strange beast, which happens rarely, but there are some interesting examples, and that's bound up with semiotics, with the sign and the signifier, the signified. So with the dislocation, this third strange form of alterity that I've been focusing on, it's a really quite unusual thing, and if I would use a kind of, to explain it, is a theoretical example. Say you would open an edition of a Russian illustrated edition of The Lord of the Rings, and say, theoretically, hypothetically, you might see an image at the beginning of Bilbo stood in the hallway of Bag End, and you look at that image. This is how the dislocation works. You look at that image and you get this immediate a bit of recognition that, oh, I know that's got to be Tolkien's drawing of Bilbo stood in the hallway of Bag End. So you have this, with dislocation, you have this immediate bit of familiarity. You recognise an image, you think, I know what that is, I know who did that. And then you suddenly think, hang on a minute, and you look a bit more closely and you think, no, that's not, in this example, that's not Tolkien's drawing of Bilbo and Bag End. In fact, that's not Bag End, that's not Bilbo. What is that? And so you have this bit of recognition, you think you know what it is, and then a second later you have a rejection because you don't know. You suddenly think, well, I'm not familiar with this, I don't know what this is. And this doesn't happen very often, but there are occasions of certain artists where this I've sort of seen this happening. So you have this familiarity, and then you have this rejection, and then so you could close the book and you could leave it and think, I'm disgusted with that, I'm going to put it away. You could maybe come back to the book a few hours later, or maybe a week later, and you think, I'm not falling for that again. You open it up and you look at the picture. First thing you think, oh, there's Tolkien's drawing of Bag End. And then a second later you think, no, it's not. I don't know what this is. And so you can kind of get trapped into a kind of cycle of recognition and rejection. So that's this dislocation idea, which I've been looking into. So I've got this tendency to focus on these unusual little quirks, which sometimes drives my my director of studies a little bit spare. But so this is what I'm looking at, this visual alterity. So sorry if I've rambled on about that. And if I've
no,
bored
not at all.
anybody,
That was totally fascinating.
But this is what I'm focusing on.
Yeah. I'd not heard of this concept of dislocation before. It sounds both like unnerving, but also really interesting, like psychologically, why readers or viewers would respond in that way. So yeah, that's really cool, and I do hope we get to read your monograph in future. Cross fingers. So given how interested you are and how much you love Tolkien's work, would you ever recommend Tolkien's work? Why or why not?
I would say definitely yes, and also no as well. So yes, because obviously I've got so much out of it, and I think if I didn't say to somebody who hadn't read it, it's worth a look, you might enjoy this, I feel like I was kind of being remiss not to do that. I really feel, I've got so much out of it. It's possible that somebody else might. So I wouldn't push it on somebody, say you have to read this, because obviously, it's up to the individual. But I would recommend it. Yeah, but sometimes it's nice. On the other hand, I always think, well, maybe I wouldn't, because it's kind of nice when you discover things yourself. And, you just come across, especially for kids, if they stumble across something themselves, which is what I did when I was a kid. And I thought, I found this out, I found this out by myself. And you kind of, it gives you a sort of sense of ownership of the story, of the world, which is nice. Obviously, you don't want to keep that to yourself and say, only people like me are allowed to look at that. Because that would be completely wrong and a bit silly. But it's nice when you happen upon things by yourself. So it would be yes and no. I didn't tell my daughter you must read this. I said, when she asked, I said, you might like that. If you want to read it, we'll have a look at it. So
Well, I think you embodied the advice from the books very well. Go not to the elves, for they will say both yes and no.
Yeah, excellent. Yes, I've forgotten.
I can't remember who said that. Whether it was in reference to Elrond or if it was Elrond himself who said it. I can't remember at this stage. But that's. I do like that approach of yours to sort of let people discover it and have that as you said, the ownership of it. It's a beautiful feeling. So that's wonderful. Well, we've heard a lot about your PhD work and everything, Joel. So as a sort of parting question, what's Tolkien work or project are you currently working on that you would like our listeners to know about?
Well, I've got several on the go, which some I won't sort of go into now, but probably one which I'm in really at the beginning of doing is the video series Arda Illuminated. So we've only done one episode so far, and obviously, as I said, no, episode 2 should be coming out fairly soon. So this is it's a work in progress. Really, what I wanted to do with this was to, for each program, take a single image from those hidden recesses, something which people may not sort of remember or may not have seen, and kind of a little bit sort of slow Tolkien, you could say, take a kind of long, detailed look at that image, what makes it tick. And I didn't just want to do like a chronology or an art appreciation kind of thing. I wanted to come at each one from a slightly different angle. So the first one I was looking at was an Yukov image of Tom Bombadil, and I looked at his kind of mosaic-like borrowing. next one will be something different. It's going to be more to do with reception and how different people view images and how they sort of create their own meaning, etc. So I wanted to use one image each time and kind of use that image, to explore that image, and to sort of speak about kind of an art historical, speak about something to do with viewing or to do with the process of creating art. So use it in that way. And I've been sort of inspired by, watched so many documentaries in the past about art and history, etc. And I just thought, well, I want to kind of bring, in my own small way, bring the same kind of art historical, kind of hard art history, sort of rigor, to a Tolkien illustration that, say, somebody would do to a Caravaggio or a Van Gogh or something like that. Both of which I love, but I'd like to bring that level of sort of scrutiny to a piece of illustration, because illustration's often downgraded and seen as sort of ephemera and kind of sort of tainted with popular culture. So it's nice to, it's a functional object, which is what images always used to be, visual objects, before the kind of creation of the art world in the sort of 18th century. Everything was functional. Illustrations kind of kept that property, and I want to just kind of take that sort of level of scrutiny, of sort of inquiry, to a piece of Tolkien illustration, and just provide some new which people haven't seen. And my daughter's helping me quite considerably with this, because she's a wizard at video editing. So she's been teaching me how to use the video editing software, etc. And she does the filming when we're out on the moor looking for locations and stuff. So
that's so wonderful. It's yet another aspect of Tolkien you get to share with her.
Yeah, it's because she does get a bit impatient, because I am very slow. And she is quick, direct, and she does things effectively very quickly, and I take ages. So she's like, "Come on, you should have done that. Why haven't you finished that? You could have done that by now, Dad."
Bless.
But I like to show people as well that still images don't have to be boring. You can kind of animate, and you can kind of get movement in a still image. The classic documentary camera people were able to do it, over the years. Ken Burns was one of the famous ones. And I just love that kind of, you just take a long, lingering look at an image, but you can kind of move around it with the camera. So, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with Ardor Illuminated. Just, I'd love to have one a week come out, but unfortunately they take a while. I've got so many other things going. They take
It sounds like an absolutely brilliant project. Can't wait to see more of it. So where can we find you around the web, Joel, whether it's to watch Ardor Illuminated or to just keep up with what you're doing?
Well, Ardor Illuminated is on YouTube. I have my channel there on YouTube. I'm on Twitter. People who follow me on Twitter know I'm always rambling on about stuff on Twitter. And so I'm always on Twitter. I have got a blog as well. I've got a website where I also occasionally post pieces of writing and some images and analysis, etc. So those are the places where I can be found lurking on the internet. Twitter is where I am most probably.
Amazing. Well, Joel, thank you so very much for being on the Tolkien Experience podcast. This has been absolutely wonderful, so illuminating, so fascinating.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been really nice.
It was great to talk to you. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. And thank you for listening.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We really enjoy making these podcasts, and the fun doesn't stop here.
That's right, it continues on social media. You can find us on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and Twitter as @TolkienEXP. Don't forget to like, follow, share and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking to our guests.
For even more content and to join our fellowship of supporters, check out our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Tolkien Experience. Finally, you can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I'm at Luke B. Shelton.
I'm at SR Westvic.
And I'm at Aaron L. Palmadill. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to us by email at tolkienexperience@gmail.com.
If you want to know more about this week's guest, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.